Hey everybody, it's Derek Fries, and I'm going to talk to you about class differences in parents' information and intervention in the lives of young adults, Part 2. Cheryl covered Part 1, I'm going to cover Part 2. The first thing I want to talk about as we go through all this is it's important to talk about the theory that guides this section. The theory that guides this section for LaRue is that class continues to matter after elementary school. Even though this is never explicitly stated as a theory, you can tell that this theory is what guides the study and also what conclusions that were made from both the interviews and observations from when the children were younger and when they're older, is that class continues to matter. The first place where class continues to matter is when we look at the responsibility for education. So who is ultimately responsible for the education of the child? When you look at the poor and working class, they found that school and educational professionals should be in charge. But the middle class parents seem to think that the parents were in charge of the education of the child. Really interesting difference right here. So let's look at it a little more in depth and compare apples to apples. So when we look at the responsibilities for education, the working class tends to view all educators as professionals. They see teachers as someone who has a higher degree than they do, so they put them on the same level of professionals as doctors and lawyers. When you talk about the middle class, they don't view teachers as true professionals such as doctors and lawyers. As a matter of fact, many of them in the middle class they found saw that they almost had a feeling of they could be teachers if they had just chosen that path themselves. And so right away we look at a possible reason that there isn't as much parental help at home is just because they simply don't know. When we look at the poor and working class, they trust the decisions of the school. They see them as the professionals, so what the professional says, I trust, let's go with it. Whereas in the middle class, there's a lot more questioning of the decisions that are made at school. Are the teachers doing this the right way? Are they intervening with my student in the correct methods? Are things happening the way I think they should? They feel more open to questioning the education. When we go back to the working class, when they disagree with the school, they think that it's a personal problem. They think that the teacher has a problem with my student, or the principal has an issue with me, and so this is how they're acting out. Whereas when you go to the middle class, when they disagree with the school, they view it as the failure to meet a professional obligation, that is something that you should be doing and you're failing to do it. They don't see it as a personal issue. The working class, and what might be the most interesting difference in this entire thing is the working class sees the parents as a help to support the teacher's goals for the child. So the teacher creates goals for the child, and the parents are there to support those goals. When we look at the middle class, the teachers are there to help support the parents' goals for the child. So the parents have goals for the children and their education, and it's the teacher's job to then support what it is that the parents think the child should be achieving. It's an interesting change right there. Another interesting way to look at this entire scope right here is an analogy that LaRue makes, where she talks about if you're a working class parent and you take your child to a surgeon, or as that they view as a professional, you expect the surgeon to perform the surgery and do the work, and that you are simply there after they're done to comfort the child. They see teachers at the same level. So when they send a student to be educated, they expect the teacher to do the educating, educate their child, and then send the child back to them educated. That's what they see as the role of the professional. The middle class obviously doesn't see it that way. They would separate those two professions. And it's interesting that the working class seems to sort of put educators on more of a pedestal, but the teachers prefer the methodology of the middle class in terms of helping their students at home. In looking at all of this and how this education works and the relationship between the teachers and the parents, it brings me into some of my studies that I've done for my dissertation. In looking at what I'm studying trust relationships in the schools. And as some of this information that I'm showing you right here comes from Bollier and Bird, two different sources. But what I'm able to synthesize together from them is that when you create a trusting environment in schools, it leads to better teaching autonomy, better working conditions, and ultimately better student achievement. And schools that empower teachers have better trust relationships at all levels. A large trust factor in improving schools is that relationship between teachers and parents. Schools would be well advised to foster that trust relationship. So the trust relationship between the school and the parent is a large indicator and a large factor in student achievement. And then the last note, which actually came from the Bird study, says that establishing trust with parents in high poverty schools can be demanding, but is worth the efforts when you compare it to the student achievement results. So the studies out there show you that this relationship is important, but we can't approach this relationship for the two different classes in the same way. This difference continues to matter when we talk about higher education. So who helps the students continue their education after they're leaving high school? The working class feels that since it's education, that belongs in the educational system, and the school system will take care of it. They've taken care of it up to this point. Why would it all of a sudden be my role? Whereas the middle class, the parents view that it's their job to help prepare their students for that next level in higher education. Again, trying to compare apples to apples. So when we're looking at higher education, the working class, many of them never went to college of any kind. So they're unfamiliar with the higher education in the process. Whereas with the middle class, many of them went and are familiar with higher education in the processes, what it takes to apply, why you should apply to multiple schools. Okay? The working class also, they begin prepping for it when relevant, just like they have every other year before that or every other school before that. You start prepping for middle school a year or two before the student goes there. You start prepping for high school a year or two before they go there. So why not prep for college a year or two before they go? However, the middle class knows that you begin prepping for college much earlier, as early as middle school or earlier. So you'll see parents in middle school starting to take their students on visits, starting to take their children to different colleges, starting to figure out what classes they're going to have to take in high school to get to the college they want to go to. Again, another comparison is the working class. They don't know the differences between the different types of schools, such as vocational or trade school, community college, university. What's the difference? It's all just the same piece of paper you're getting from all of them, right? Well, the middle class knows the difference in schools. They help beginning to place and prepare their child for the program of their choice at a young age. Like I was just talking about in the previous point. You start getting ready for, my student's going to go to an Ivy League university, so I need to make sure that they're taking AP classes and on an advanced placement track. Whereas when you're in the working class, going to community college is going to college. Going to college is just going to college. It doesn't matter what that college is. One last difference is that the working class sees that since it's education, the expectation is on the school to help with the applications. So same thing, much as when they went from middle school to high school, the parents didn't have to do typically a whole lot of work in order to figure out the high school and where they're going to go and what they're going to do. And if they did, it was when they were wrapping up middle school. It wasn't years in advance. And not only that, but it's more complicated. So when you get to the middle class, they help their children apply for college, financial aid. So there's another big one, is the FAFSA. Working class parents who aren't familiar with the FAFSA or the FAFSA process. We all know that any of us that are filling out those forms, that's a difficult process. It takes some learning, even for people that have been through it. I can only imagine for people that have no idea what it is, why it is, any of those things. So when you're in the middle class, you have parents helping with that sort of thing. And when you're in the working class, you have no idea that that stuff even exists and don't know where to begin with it. So that class continues to matter. Not only does this go from middle school to high school to possibly higher education, but this class continues to matter as they transition to adulthood. As was found, when do the students feel responsible for themselves? Well, the working class by the end of high school. They're ready to be responsible for themselves and take charge and do what they've got to do to start their career and family. Whereas with the middle class, after schooling is completed and beyond, they still feel that maybe they're not completely responsible for themselves. They still tend to lean on their parents more. Let's go through some more specific examples. So in the working class, children feel personally responsible for themselves by high school graduation. I've graduated high school, now it's time for me to be an adult. I've got to do my own things. My parents are now separated from my life. They expect me to be an adult, do my own things. Whereas in the middle class, the students, the children will continue to rely on parental guidance and intervention through college and beyond. They will expect parents to help them fill out financial aid forms. I can tell you from my own experience, my parents did my financial aid forms all through my undergrad. Once I had to do it on my own in graduate school, I started to understand how crazy that was and how difficult it was, and had a little bit of respect for my mother who had been filling those out for me. But in the working class, that'll be on the student to know and figure out and learn on their own. The working class also will begin to support their parents once working full time. In this study, they found a lot of these students in the working class, if not many or most, were giving money back to their parents, starting to pay for their parents for different things as they began their careers or their full-time jobs. Whereas in the middle class, they continue to receive money from their parents even after starting jobs and getting working. An interesting difference right there. But what may be one of the most concerning differences to me is the one that I'm going to point out next. And that is that the roles reverse in terms of, as it was described in the book, appearing younger, bouncier, and more childlike than the other group. I look at this and say it seems like they appear happier. They found that with the poor or the working class, the elementary students, the elementary age kids, were younger. They appeared younger. They were bouncier. They were more childlike than the middle class elementary age students. And so, I thought about that a lot and how difficult that is, the way I'm raising my children. Am I over planning and things like that? But then you get to, as these students get older. As the students get older, the working class, the students actually reverse. The middle class students become bouncier, more childlike, appear younger. The working class students are less bouncy, are less childlike, are more adult-like. You get the middle class students leaving high school thinking that they've got the whole world in front of them. Now they get an opportunity to do what they want to do, to carve their own path, to go the way they want to go. And the working class students at the same time feel more pigeonholed than they've ever been before. Their paths are actually taken away from them at that point. It's narrowed down. They're reduced to less. It's a very interesting but kind of disturbing scenario that happens. The last slide I'm going to share with you is my questions. I'll have the questions posted in the discussion, but I thought maybe they merit just a little bit of explanation. So my first question is, what does this mean? So we've gotten to or near the end of the text at this point. What does it mean? As we look at these differences, how does that apply? What does that mean for me and my school? What does that mean for you and your school? What does it mean? Where do we go from here? The next question I have is that we expect teachers to treat students as individuals. But do we do the same with parents? Or do we treat them all the same, with the same expectations? From my experience, we treat all parents the same. We expect a parent of 6 children that's a single parent working 2 jobs to read 15 minutes every night to their child. Why is the expectation the same for that parent as what we have for other parents? What can we do as schools to possibly address that? My last question is, can or even should schools play a larger role in higher education preparation for the students? By this, I don't just mean, are our classes in high school prepping them for college? I mean, should we be taking middle school students to college visits? Should we be taking high school students to college visits? Should we be teaching all high school students how to fill out the FAFSA? Should we be helping students in 8th and 9th grade figure out goals and college paths? Should we? Can we? Should we? So those are my questions for you. Hopefully you got a little something out of this and I wasn't too boring and I didn't speak too fast or jumble too many words, but I appreciate you listening. It's been a really interesting book for me. Caused a lot of reflection on myself and how I'm raising my children. So hopefully you just got a little something out of this presentation, and I look forward to everybody's responses. Have a good one.